Serious, what's the scariest work-related incident you've experienced? Former teacher here. Saw a fight going down just inside the boys' room next to the cafeteria. Didn't understand how bad it was until I grabbed the kid closest to me and flung him backwards against the wall. That's when I saw the other kid holding his stomach and the blood oozing out of the stab wound through his fingers. That was the moment I realized the kid I just chucked behind me and couldn't see must be holding a weapon. That split second of total vulnerability before I wheeled around on him was pretty terrifying. Fortunately, the kid holding the cheap steak knife he'd brought from home wasn't as tough as he thought he was. He was still leaning against the wall right where I tossed him, looking like he was about to puke. Turns out the kid that got stabbed was a serious bully and the other kid had had enough. Injury wasn't serious and the school expelled the kid who did the stabbing. I used to be a manager at a big box retailer. One night, we got a call from LAPD, we weren't in LA, but nearby, asking if we had an employee named John. He was working in the stockroom that night, so they told us to not allow him on the sales floor for any reason. It turns out his uncle, high on something, had killed both of his parents and his younger sister, and was heard talking about coming for John, all over an inheritance of a few $1,000s. Within minutes of the phone call, local cops were both parked outside the building and stationed inside the doors with pictures of the uncle. Luckily for us, he was caught after he hit a bus stop driving to our store. LAPD detectives came and broke the news to John in our stockroom. I've never heard such an awful sound of horror and anguish in my life, and hope never to hear anything like it again. The managers kept him on the payroll, falsifying his punches to make sure he kept his job until he was ready to come back and make sure he had money to live. He came back after 6 weeks a very different person. A twin-engine aircraft lost an engine on takeoff, went into an uncontrollable left turn, and crashed into a building at the airport I used to work at. 4 people died. Working the response to that was something I'd rather not do again. I work as a safety inspector for working on with very polluted ground. Regulations said I needed to be present 1 day a week, so I was just in time to see one of the workmen cross the very dangerous, enter only with full protective gear fences, and hop across a trench, which was full of heavier than air nastiness. He misses, slips down and in short order proceeds to first puke out his stomach contents and then pass out mid-vomit. By the time they pulled him out and into the ambulance, he had a lung capacity of about 30% and was pretty much blind. Poor man never got a penny apart from the "we're really sorry" pension from work, because it was his own fault. I was working in a really busy bar when the assistant manager ran out to me from the office and told me to call security. I did it right away, but as I was doing so, looked over to the office. It was very small with a window you could see directly into, and saw our then head chef serving a proper beat down onto our general manager. My manager was sitting down with his head covered by his arms, and this guy was just wailing into him. I have never seen someone's arms going so fast. I can't imagine how many hits he got in. Some other kitchen guys were trying to get the door open, but there was a key code on it, so it was just a bunch of guys hammering on the door, begging the chef to stop. The assistant manager ran back to open the door so that the guys could pull him off. He was still trying to go for it, and it took so many of them to peel him away. Security arrived quickly and got him out of there. He was arrested and charged, and obviously never came back. What happened could have been anyone at any time, I guess. He was having a mild argument over rotas with my assistant manager when my general manager stepped in. He just snapped. He even picked up the computer monitor in the office and smashed it to pieces in the process. My GM ended up with stitches on his head. This whole situation probably only lasted a few minutes, but that it happened in such a busy place in the middle of the day, it was just chaos. Chefs are all crazy, man. I've never worked in a kitchen where the head chef wasn't a psycho. We had a co-worker have a massive heart attack in the office during a court proceeding. I ended up just storming out of the courtroom to assist in CPR. He ended up surviving, amazingly, and had a quadruple bypass. Trying to do a physical examination on a cow, get squished up against the metal railing, smacking the crap out of the cow to get it to move. Realize the cow probably doesn't even notice. Luckily, there was a big burly guy around to help. Big cows can be so dangerous. even when they're not doing anything crazy. But a scared, amped up cow is scary too. Tornado at 1 AM when we had a tent full of about 500 drunk people that we had to herd indoors to a safe place. I'm an event planner. I was a social worker. Dealt with a case where a couple high on M tied their 6-month-old baby to a washing line and hit it back and forth to each other using baseball bats, killing the child. When I was still a student architect, working part-time in a firm, we had an on-site workplace accident. We were doing some restoration work to an old hotel that had its roof blown off during the winter. The contract was going well, and the work on site was quick. But a storm came through and ended up causing more damage to the work site. We shut the site down, told the contractor to keep his workers off site until we could have a surveyor come in and make sure everything was stable. The contractor cleared all his men off the site, but they forgot that there was a subcontractor working on site that day, removing old door frames. The damaged roof wasn't pinned securely, and the whole thing came down while the guy was still inside working. He died from his injuries, and everyone involved in that contract got sued. In the end, the contractor was found to be at fault, because it was their job to keep track of who was on site. But the architect also ended up folding just from legal costs. I'm a construction superintendent. I've seen some crap on the job that would make a lot of folks here curl up into a ball and cry. The worst was a crane accident. It was a 500-ton mobile crane. Brand freaking shiny new. 2. We were setting precast panels for a large office warehouse combined building. The oiler, aka crane operator in training, was polishing the shiny aluminum deck on the crane. While the crane was operating, he thought he was in a safe spot because the panels were on the truck over there and were being set over here. So he was not in the current swing area of the crane, except that the precast guys needed a box of plates that were on the opposite side of the crane. So the crane swung that away. The freaking guy was smashed between the crane's counterweights and the crane deck. He never made a sound, and the operator did not even know it had happened. His body was twisted and mangled nearly beyond recognition before one of the truck drivers saw the blood. There were little bits of brain and bones spread all over the place. It was freaking horrible. Lots of horror show stories from my old job. They kind of all blend together. Anyway, ex-healthcare security. The area I worked in had a lot of problems with homelessness, addictions, and psych issues. You get used to a lot of weird crap. But one time I was asked to evict someone from the waiting room who'd been in the bathroom for an hour. I opened the door and see him with a needle. Fine. We all suspected he was shooting up in there. Crappy, but it happens. Except he wasn't. He was using his needle to extract blood from his arm and squirt it down the sink, over and over again. Maybe he was trying to kill himself, or maybe he had some delusion of needing to purify his blood. He was speaking French the whole time, so it was unclear. Nurses demand we get him out of there. We try, and the first thing he does is lunge at us and try to attack us with his bloody needle. The help we get from the nurses and doctors is their shouted assurances that yes, this guy is HIV positive. Which means if he even pricks me with that needle once, I am HIV positively screwed. Now, I know a lot of security guards out here are going to ask why I didn't mace or tase him at this point. We don't get those where I worked. In fact, we don't get anything at all. Technically, I'm not even allowed to punch or kick this guy because patient safety is #1 priority. So we have to grab something, anything to fight the guy with the needle with. One of the guys at the desk grabs a clipboard and uses it as a shield against the needle while we wrestle this guy to the ground and wait for the cops to get there. I am very glad nobody screwed up. One time one of my co-workers came to work really high and violent, so he started bashing things with a large knife and spilling enchilada sauce all over the floor and just staring at people. I was 16 at the time, and so this was particularly disturbing and scary to me. Thought for sure he was gonna stab someone. I believe he ended up in jail shortly after, so I didn't see much of him after that. Working in a dish room, I was loading dishes while my craphead co-worker was opening some new cutlery for us to wash. He was opening bread knives by, get this, grabbing the plastic packaging and yanking the knife out of it with the blade facing his hand. Ended up pulling one out and slicing half his hand in the process. The only way I knew he cut his hand, because I usually ignore whatever balls he's up to, was he managed to shoot blood all over the counter, the dishes on it, and the wall directly in front of me. I ended up having to bleach everything, including the dishes that the servers would put directly on top of the puddles of blood. Yeah, I work with a bunch of idiots. I worked in a restaurant that had a power soaker for pots, pans, trays. Basically a giant sink with jacuzzi jets. One day I was fishing around in the completely opaque dishwater trying to grab a pot when one of our 2-foot long carving knives pulls a jaws on me. Better believe I drained that sucker and dealt with it once I could see what was going on inside. I was in charge of stopping trucks when planes came down my taxiway so they didn't collide, and an airport operations officer was there to assist me. There was me and 2 other people watching the same taxiway to ensure that no truck was present when a plane was even close to the crossing. One day, everything is running smooth until I see a truck slam on its brakes partway into the intersection to find that the pilot had turned down the wrong taxiway and stopped in time to keep the turbine far enough away from the truck before it caused any damage. Everything was fine in the end, but it's scary to think that it was so close to a major incident. I used to work at a Pizza Hut in a really bad area of town. One night I was working, and this guy had been calling and complaining all day that his pizza sauce was too spicy. We remade and delivered it pizza 3 times, and each time the guy was dissatisfied. Finally we're getting near closing, so the last time the guy calls, the manager tells him that there's nothing more he can do for him and he's not sending another driver out. If he wants, he's welcome to come down to the store and we can issue him a refund. So now it's almost closing. I'm not issued as someone with closing duties, so I'm clocked out and about to leave when Spicy Guy comes in with his pizza. This guy is tweaking. He's obviously on M or something, and absolutely deranged. But we process the refund and tell him he can keep the pizza. Well, he wants us to try it. He opens the box and keeps repeated, "Nah man, you gotta try this pizza. So spicy. You guys must be putting chiltepines in it or something. Try my pizza. You gotta try my pizza," while repeatedly jabbing his finger into the pizza, getting sauce all over him. For the record, this sauce is not spicy. If anything, it's disgustingly sweet. But none of us want to try this old ass pizza that this guy is repeatedly jamming his grubby finger into, so we kept politely declining. Soon politely comes to bluntly, then bluntly comes to asking him to leave. He packs up his pizza and leaves without a fuss, and we're all left awkwardly standing there. And as the guy pulls away, I decide to break the silence. I turn to my coworker who I've got a bit of a crush on and say, "Hey, coworker, wanna try my pizza?" And we both start giggling insanely. Well, Spicy Guy saw us giggling through the window and zooms back into his parking spot and bolts back into the store screaming, "You think something is freaking funny?" Then climbs onto the counter and screams, "Are you laughing at me, you punk? Come the frick outside with me. I'll teach you a fricking lesson," while pointing angrily at my coworker who I was hitting on. We all start panicking and telling him to leave while threatening to call the cops. He finally leaves while still screaming obscenities, and my manager runs and locks the door. Okay, we're safe now, right? Nope. The saloon starts circling the building in his truck waiting for someone to leave on a delivery. When he realizes we aren't that freaking stupid, he rolls his window and points a gun at my coworker and I. We all hit the deck. The waitress is sobbing, and the manager is frantically dialing 911. The guy leaves before the cops show up, but that wasn't the last of him. He kept repeatedly calling the store the next day screaming that he was gonna kill us and all this stuff. Well, we have his address from deliveries. He got arrested pretty quickly after that, and that's how I almost got several people shot by asking my coworker to eat me out. I own a machine shop. We have a large vertical lathe, and one day we were turning this 150 pounds piece of steel about 20 inches diameter and 4-5 inches thick. Well, the operator turned up the RPMs thinking he was going to save some time. This 150 pound steel frisbee came loose from the chuck and flew through the back of the machine, over another machine, missed a guy by maybe 10-15 feet and slammed into a concrete wall door frame, completely destroying it. It flew about 100 feet faster than you could blink. I'd rather get shot with a cannon that got hit with that. It was terrifying. I don't know if I'd call this scary or just sad and settling. I used to work as a cashier in a liquor store, and there were always the regulars. people who are waiting outside the door before we have even opened. At 9 AM, they come every day and always buy the same thing. Usually a pint or two of cheap vodka, often coming in 2 or 3 times a day. They always have exact change. They never want a receipt. In the morning, their hands are shaking. They can barely speak, and they look like they're about to pass out. When they come in the second or third time, they're much more relaxed but their speech is slurred. A few times customers peed themselves at the register or fell down and could barely stand back up. It's the saddest thing I've ever seen. And scary. To think they're so addicted to alcohol that they can't stop themselves or accept help from this destructive lifestyle that will kill them. Just for a side note, and I asked my boss this within a week of working here, we're not allowed to deny a customer unless they are under 21 or are causing a disruption in the store. I hated serving these people and hope they are all able to get help. A buddy of mine took a second job at a liquor store. He said that the actual work was pretty easy, but one night, a lady came in crying. She puts a big bottle of cheap vodka and tearfully begs my friend to talk her out of buying it and falling off the wagon. He successfully did it, but after that he noped hard out of that job. Work in a hospital. We had a major gas leak and had to evacuate both the adult and peds ERs. It was an all hands on board situation. If you could push a stretcher they expected you to help. Our ERs can hold up to 400 people. Thankfully we only had 200. The smell of natural gas was filling up the facility, so we were evacuating them to the ambulance bays, the lobbies, hallways, whatever we had to do. Took almost 2 hours to shut down the gas and another hour to get patients back to the bays in the ERs. Then we had to run around grabbing the oxygen tanks and such. Thankfully nobody was hurt, but knowing the place you are helping people and could blow up at any minute is really unnerving. I used to work for an electronics store, and we were open late on Thursday nights. They weren't ever busy, so we only had one person on from about 5 PM until close at 9 PM. This was in a nice, upper middle class neighborhood, and I lived around the corner from the store, so that person was usually me. One night a guy comes in, and he's furious about some product he's bought not working like he expected it to. It's not faulty. He just didn't do his research when he bought it and thought it was a different thing. We can't return or refund it in this case. I'm explaining this to him, and he's getting more and more angry and eventually moves into threatening. I tell him if he's going to be like that I'm going to call the police. He grabs me by the collar over the counter and says, well, you'd better call them pretty freaking quickly then. I should point out here that this guy was about 6'4", and I am a 5'3", 120-pound woman. I was also 19 at the time. This is about as terrifying as it gets. I slam the emergency button under the counter. The police station is less than a minute away, so I figure they'll be there quickly enough. The guy, at this point, lets go of my collar and shoves me into the wall behind the counter, then comes around and pins me against the wall. He's shaking me and screaming in my face when the cops get there. I spend the rest of the evening giving statements. No serious damage done, but a lot of bruising. For bigger purchases at this store we take it for the warranty, and after I explained to the manager what happened, she pulled his ID from the system so she could familiarize the staff with his face and we could contact security if he ever came back. The address on his license was right across the street from my house. I lived in that house for a year and never once left the house without being terrified I'd run into him. Needless to say, I don't work there anymore. You have been visited by the donkey of good jokes. Comment, I'm not a clown, but I make good jokes, so they always laugh at your jokes. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day, you magnificent people.